Elliott W. Eisner is the great innovator that helped us to understand the impact the arts have on the mind. He once said that, quote, "It may be that by shifting the paradigm of education reform and teaching from one modeled after the clock-like character of the assembly line into one that is closer to the studio or innovative science laboratory might provide us with a vision that better suits the capacities and the futures of the students we teach. It is in this sense, I believe, that the field of education has much to learn from the arts about the practice of education. It is time to embrace a new model for improving our schools." So a little bit of background on Eisner. He was born in 1933, grew up on the west side of Chicago, and he was very talented at a young age and worked in the field of art education for over 35 years. And he completed his master's in art education at Illinois Institute of Technology. Furthering his education, he later received his Master's of Arts in Education at the University of Chicago. But he didn't stop there. He went on to later receive his PhD in education at the University of Chicago as well. And because of his vast array of knowledge and understanding, he had many careers and callings that allowed him to share his appreciation of education and arts with his students, because first he was a high school art teacher, and then later on he became an art teacher, an instructor of education, and an assistant professor of education at the University of Chicago. Likewise, he was also called as a teacher in art education at Ohio State University. He became an associate professor of education and a professor of education and art at Stanford University. Amongst his boundless contributions that he made to education today was the need to advance the role that art plays. Educational leaders had often referred to art as nice, where Eisner argued that it isn't just nice, it's necessary, and that it isn't just something determined by emotions and creative forces, but that there's a greater depth and knowledge that can be found in art than meets the eye. He challenged the supposed fundamentals that educators had been using by asking questions that others hadn't necessarily considered. He stressed his concern and apprehension for the need of more expressionism in students. He taught that we need to see the world from an aesthetic perspective, and this doesn't just confine us to the arts, but that this can in fact be a way that we look at the world with aesthetic qualities. Another influence that he had was the way that the arts were taught and conducted. He felt a strong need for our education to explore further into the historical context aspect of art. He argued that not learning about this more in depth is limiting the potential for a student's cognitive and creative thinking. And in the present today, how he's influenced today is that since he disagreed with the approaches in teaching in which a teacher simply provides materials and leaves it at that, leaves it up to the student, he advocated a refined and strict art program in which art education was on the same par as math and science and reading. And he stated that expecting creativity to flow with this much simple instruction resulted in courses, quote, "with little or no structure, limited artistic content, and a few meaningful aims," end quote. He also served as the president of the National Art Education Association, NAEA, and during this calling he created a list of 10 lessons that the arts teach. This list was put on posters, and then it could be found on school hallways today even. It had a profound influence on our education. And thanks to his knowledge and encouragement, our education has become a content-oriented discipline. Art curriculum isn't as ambiguous as it once was when students were handed a paintbrush and paper and told to get to work. The arts have become more about history and techniques. Because of his concern that art is critical to education, he was able to share his opinion in importance to reform our educational systems. So, while upsetting cuts were made in America in regards to arts not being academic enough, Eisner argued that arts were actually very essential in developing critical thinking skills in children. And his concern for expressive outcomes is something that impacted education everywhere. And from a personal aspect, I actually, before I switched majors, I was an integrated studio art major. I'm now working towards early childhood education. I see that I feel that the education systems today have been influenced by Eisner because they have taken the arts more seriously. It is no longer required, it's no longer regarded as something that's just nice, it's necessary. There's more pressure on our educators today to teach and evaluate effectively. I feel that this has influenced me because of all the art classes that I've taken, in which they've taught me not just about art, but about perspective that I hadn't seen before at all. I learned how to find the beauty in things and studied more about the historically famous artists and major impressionists and techniques that I hadn't even given much thought to before. I agree with his opinions in which art can train one's mind to learn things otherwise wouldn't have been learned, because I feel that had I not taken these art classes, I wouldn't have learned these certain things that I have learned. I wouldn't have had this aesthetic perspective that I do now, that he's taught educators nationwide. And that the creative outlook on life that he has taught is that it can only be described as beautiful. And thank you very much.